The wound is very fresh
Oh,
from
it is.
Bond.
It is. I only watched it last night.
Yes, I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about it way into the night, maybe giving it more thought than it actually deserves. Um, but I think let's keep on we're going to keep with a bit of a theme actually on this whole old Hollywood train and talk a little bit about Babylon. And when I hear Babylon, I can only think of the Lady Gaga song.
I think that song is probably more entertaining than this overall film. I'm sorry, but the vibes are not going to get much more positive from
Oh
here going into
dear. I mean,
the
Babylon by
Babylon
Lady
review.
Gaga is a bop, so I'm guessing that Babylon, the film, is I'm quoting here, not a bop.
I can't think of a word that is the opposite of bop.
It's a flop.
But yeah, yes, a very aggravating flop at that.
It's not
So
a bop, it's a flop.
indeed. So the plot of Babylon, in as much as it even has a plot, if you can call having a bunch of like really excessive, over choreographed, irritating set pieces, a plot, is that we have three kind of very thinly drawn Hollywood archetypes one of which is Manny, who has come to uh, the titular Babylon, Los Angeles, the Hollywoods, to work in the film industry. We have Nellie Leroy, played by Margot Robbie, who's this very vivacious, loudmouth, very larger than life prospective actress who's trying to break into, do anything she can to get a role on screen. And then we have Brad Pitt as Jack Conrad, who is an established Hollywood actor, his career is going strong at the start of the film, but as we progress, we maybe he starts to think maybe his time in the limelight is fading and that his, star power and successful career is starting to dwindle. These three ideas is nothing we haven't already seen before in the film. Thematically and story-wise, does very little with it. There is almost nothing in the way of interesting character development in this film, or anything that kind of doesn't reek of cliche of Hollywood dramas in the past. The film in general is just so devoid of anything substantive to say about Hollywood or the changing of the industry or any sort of corruption of moral values or anything like that. I was talking to Marianne recently actually, and she said about how we were saying how it would have been far better if Manny, for example, had come into the film as being this bright-eyed, optimistic, idealistic guy who romanticizes Hollywood and the film industry and the way it works, and then is slowly corrupted by the debauchery and the seediness that is, that occurs under the surface of all the work. And I guess he does become harder edged as the film goes on, but he doesn't really, he's not really given enough of a personality for it to be all that engaging. The actual experience of the general mood and actual experience of watching Babylon, the closest thing I can equate it to is being strapped into a human-sized slingshot and fired between two large concrete walls so that you then hit and rebound between both of those walls for just over 3 hours. It is that senselessly extravagant and pummeling. The film is sometimes technically impressive and visually kind of awe-inspiring. I say sometimes because outside of these large-scale film shoot sequences, the camera movement goes so unbelievably haywire. It feels like the operator had cocaine shot directly into his veins prior to Damien Chazelle calling action.
Is he at the same party as the cinematographer of Elvis?
Yeah, literally. But like these exhausting whip pans and crash zooms and frenetic editing, that make Elvis seem slow, are just are flung around with such reckless abandon that it makes the use of split screen and Elvis seem like a sensible and nuanced directorial decision. It's hard to put into words how obnoxiously bombastic and full throttle Babylon is. And to the point where I was completely exhausted and aggravated before even the 1 hour mark. You can imagine how much I was losing the will to live by the 3 hour mark. The few times the film does slow down and try to offer something even remotely resembling an actual story or character portrait, it becomes glaringly apparent that the screenplay has staggeringly little to offer. in the realm of thematic material or insights into the changing film industry, or the ramifications of its excesses on the characters, how it negatively affects them. It also doesn't help that it's kind of billed as an epic comedy drama if you Google it, but it has absolutely no sense of comedic timing. You know, in the opening sequence where they're trying to bus an elephant up a hill in a desert, the elephant really unceremoniously, explosively defecates directly onto the lens. And this is just thrown in with no sense of a punchline or comedic timing, that it's like, oh, that's just gross and, you know, unexpected and yuck. Why is that even here? What response is that supposed to elicit humor from me or a laugh? You know, comedic sequences are either dragged out or elongated to such an extent that by the end you're so annoyed and impatiently waiting for the punchline that when it finally does happen, you're like, oh yeah, all right, they finally came, and then, you know, by that point, any sort of humor has been sucked out of it completely, or the gag and the punchline is thrown in so prematurely into the sequence that it punches you around the face, and it just doesn't. The impact is about as flaccid as it could possibly be, and in the longer sequences, any comedic tension is just wrung dry. There are brief flashes of the poetry and the insight that was present in La La Land. There's this quite surprisingly beautifully written lament in how appearing in a film gives an actor immortal impact that will reverberate through future generations, that one character says to Brad Pitt. There's a piece of meditative piano scoring, Margot Robbie drifting into a side street, shrouded in darkness. It's kind of metaphorically her fading into obscurity. But even most of these sequences are soured, by another shot of debauchery, occurring soon after, or a scene, for example, at the end, a montage that is quite beautiful to begin with and emotive, and this quite loving and reminiscing montage of cinema and watching a movie and what the memories that brings back. But then it's stretched out with this really eye-popping, explosive montage that just sucks the soul that had previously been built up in that scene. Now, this is all these issues I've previously mentioned are compounded by the fact, probably one of the biggest issues I had outside of the frenetic pace of it is the tone. The closest thing in terms of extravagance I can liken Babylon to is The Great Gatsby and The Wolf of Wall Street. It doesn't have the stylistic panache or the emotive, elegant deconstruction of the American dream that Gatsby does. And it doesn't have the devilish charisma or self-awareness to poke fun at how ridiculous the behavior is, like The Wolf of Wall Street does. There's, profane verbal abuse is fired off with the rapidity and force of like heavy-duty artillery gunfire. Gags are attempted to be squeezed out of crew members dying on set due to, inhumane working conditions, women being beaten, overdosing on drugs, suicide. The visuals are dingy and pessimistic in these sequences. The really kind of deep sepia tone of the lighting. The characters are endlessly morose and hateful and bitter. It's one thing for a film to be ponderously pretentious and bloated. It's another thing entirely for said film to revel in that chaos with the intention of being enthrallingly entertaining, whereas actually it just reads as a venomous, mean-spirited and morally bankrupt. Yeah. Can you tell I hated this film?
Yeah, I kind of got that impression about halfway through, to be honest. Yeah, not a fan.
No, not a fan. D, straight D. I was thinking of D minus,
okay.
but then I thought actually there's a few flashes of subtlety this had in it. Made me bring it up from that grade. But even then, like I said, those moments are soured.
Okay, well,